Welcome to the Great Sales Leaders Know podcast. Our guest today is Tony Perzow, a negotiation keynote speaker and trainer, an international sales expert and author. He has led presentations and workshops for over 10,000 professionals from companies like Walmart, Apple, Google, Microsoft, and Intel, just to name a few. In his seminars and workshops, he incorporates age-old negotiation tactics with cutting-edge conversation AI data, along with game-changing challenger sale methodologies to help organizations negotiate with a potent modern-day process. You can check more out about Tony at his website, www.tonyperzow.com. That's www.tonyperzow.com. Tony, how's it going today?
It's going great. Thank you so much for having me on.
Awesome. And I know that you're in Chicago for the Sales Leadership Summit, correct?
I am, and I just finished a half hour ago teaching a 2-hour workshop on concession making strategy. And it was a lot of fun. I had everybody in the room. I gave about an hour of content, so about 10 negotiation tactics and strategies that everyone must have. And then I had everybody negotiate a case study. Hopefully that they would apply these tactics that I taught them. And then I did a critique of their negotiation so they can see that these tactics that I teach and these strategies that I teach actually work, and they can see them evidenced in these negotiation simulations. So it was pretty successful, and it was a lot of fun.
Awesome. That's great to hear. It sounds like a great event. And it sounds like that's a really valuable seminar that you put on.
Yeah.
Today we've got three primary focuses. We'd like to talk about negotiation tactics specific to salary negotiations.
Sure.
Followed by, you mentioned a lot in your videos, salespeople often undermine the value or the power that they hold in a buying and selling negotiation. So we'd like to hear your thoughts on that. And then lastly, you have a forthcoming book titled You Suck at Negotiating, but You Don't Have to, with a mindful negotiation practice. I'd love to hear a little bit about, what the key takeaways will be from there. But before we get into that, Tony, I'd just love if you could speak on how did you get introduced to sales? We ask everybody who comes on the podcast how they got introduced to, a career in sales, and how did you get to where you are now?
Well, it's interesting. So I was just having this conversation with someone, how it's like some of these things are in our DNA. I remember I met this I live in LA, and I was having this conversation with this UFC fighter. He's retired now. He must be in his mid 40s, and he was talking to me about how he grew up without a father. So his father kind of left when he was like a baby, and he never met his father until he was in his 20s. When his father came back around, and he didn't know anything about his father, and he wound up becoming this UFC fighter, and he found out that his father, after 20 years, was also a fighter, was a boxer. Oh, wow. So these things kind of like follow us along. So I was, I'm from a long line of salespeople, and my father was, I was raised by my father he was a single dad, and he was a serial entrepreneur, meaning every week was a different business idea that he was starting or working on. And I joke that, and this is true, that my bedroom became also the room where all his failed business ideas lived. And as a kid, I remember jumping on the phone and trying to sell his failed business ideas. And because we didn't have a lot of money growing up and couldn't afford like babysitters and stuff for me, he would just drag me along to conferences and to trade shows and to retailers, and he would show me how to merchandise and how to deal with buyers. And so I kind of it kind of got ingrained with business and sales, and it became kind of ingrained in me as a young boy. And it just made sense that when I hit my 20s that I would kind of follow suit. So being an entrepreneur, and also had a number of sales jobs as well. And right before I started teaching negotiation, there was a couple of years where I went back and worked for a company. So I went back to the corporate world, and I worked for a company they were called ESI, and they're the world's largest closeout trading company in the world. They were a $1 billion company. So on any given day, I was buying deals and I was selling deals. So I would be buying like maybe 50,000 TVs. At any given time, I had like $100 million that I could spend on closeouts. And then I would have to actually go and then sell these closeouts, whether it be TVs or turkey roasters or golf bags. Every given day we had like tons of SKUs, and I would have to buy get a good deal, and then turn around and then sell this deal to like a Costco, to a Walmart, to a Sam's Club, to some sort of foreign distributor, and try to sell it before it ever even hit our public warehouse. So I would try to sell the whole lot, so we didn't even have to store these goods. It could just go right to the retailer that I was selling it to. So I learned a lot about negotiation, a lot about buying, and a lot about sales in that process. So I guess I just gave you a very long-winded answer. I
don't know.
apologize, but it's just I think it's just, as I said at the beginning, it's part of my DNA.
Right.
Yeah.
And it's interesting too. I mean, you mentioned that your father was a serial entrepreneur, and obviously you where you are now, you're an entrepreneur yourself. So I'm assuming he played a factor in that decision.
Yes, I mean, my sister is an entrepreneur. My mother is. My father is. Most of my family is. So I grew up. I kind of is nature versus nurture. So I grew up in Montreal, and so French Canada, but I grew up as a minority. I grew up as an Anglophone. So English-speaking person, and it got to a point where there's not a lot of opportunities for English-speaking people in the corporate world of Quebec because you need to be French. So a lot of like kind of growing up in that environment as an English-speaking person living in Quebec, you kind of have to create your own opportunities. So yeah, so definitely it's what I saw. I saw around me everybody was creating businesses, so that was the normal. That was normal to me. So I've always aspired to having my own thing and working on my own thing. I don't think I would have it any other way. Even with the instability and the unpredictability of being a business owner, it's I couldn't have it any other way.
Yeah, no, that's awesome, and it's obviously you're doing quite well, and I'd love to chat with you, about what you do.
Sure.
Starting with obviously negotiation tactics. So let's face it, you've witnessed hundreds, probably thousands of negotiations, throughout your career, and right off the bat, I'd love to chat. What are some inherent flaws in negotiating? Why do people suck at negotiating? I can tell you that I suck at it. I thought it was great. And then when I was at the car dealership a few months ago buying my first vehicle, it very quickly became apparent that I was on the losing end. So, what are some inherent flaws that you see from most people?
Well, okay. Well, number one, it's geographical. So anybody kind of living in kind of in the United States, living in Canada, we definitely are at a disadvantage because we kind of have it easy, right? If you grow up, I spent some time living in Cairo, and I remember my first night in Cairo. I went out to not a grocery store; it was like a market to buy some like vegetables, some potatoes, some rice, just some staples to have in my little apartment in Cairo. And I remember I went into this little market and I bought just a few items like you would, like a bag of rice, some potatoes, and just some vegetables, some fruit. And it took me like an hour and 47 minutes to buy like 3 items because everything I had to negotiate over. It's kind of a silly example,
Wow.
but the thing is, you grow up in other cultures and other countries, and negotiating, haggling, it's a way of life. It's part of life. You literally come out of the womb and your parents are teaching you how to haggle because your livelihood, your life is dependent on your ability to negotiate. Here, United States and in Canada, where you are, we have it easy. We have fixed pricing. We go into a grocery store, you go into a Loblaws grocery store, and you see a bag of almonds for $3.99. No one ever says, you know what, today I'm going to offer Loblaws $2.27. The only negotiation is whether I'm willing to pay $3.99 or not. So it's a muscle that doesn't get exercised with us. It's a muscle that doesn't get worked. And in fact, it's a muscle that we avoid. I mean, I don't know, here in the States, we have CarMax commercials, which is like, come buy your car from us. You don't have to negotiate. You don't have to negotiate. We're scared of it. I even saw this job ad at like a car dealership. I think it was a Honda dealership that says, come work for us. We've got a negotiation-free selling strategy or methodology that we use. So we've become deathly scared of negotiation. So that's a big issue, is that we're not practiced. We're scared of it. Another one is we generally, in this country, in Canada, we don't like combativeness. We don't like conflict. We avoid it. We don't want to step on people's toes. We want people to like us. There's an epidemic in this country called negotiating through email. It's much easier to negotiate with someone when they don't have to see us. So we're working against ourselves all the time. We negotiate through email. We don't like face to face. It's uncomfortable. So there's lots of things that are hindering us. And one of the first things I teach people is that these are the things that are killing you. These are the things: not having skill, being scared to do it, not liking conflict. And I start teaching people to start looking at negotiation as a game, because it really is a game. Because a lot of it is smoke and mirrors. You go into negotiation, you're only showing cards you want people to see. You're not showing cards that you don't want people not to see. So it's a lot of, you can't really trust anything in a negotiation. So if you can start seeing it as a game, and I teach negotiation like a game, you'll take it less personally. So all those things are reasons why we have trouble doing it. And then the biggest reason, which is what my book is going to be about, is that we need to be prepared. So how are you supposed to? How are you supposed? It's like that old expression: you'll do better in life if you're prepared in life. But how are you supposed to do better in a negotiation when you don't know how to prepare for a negotiation? How are you supposed to do your homework when you don't know what the assignment is? So preparation is the big thing, and because most people are going out there, and I call it smoking hopium, right? Hoping for the best. I go out there shooting from the hip, smoking the hopium, and hoping that I don't know what the hell I'm doing, but hopefully it's working, and I'm going to get a good deal for myself. But the fact is, you need to schedule out 2 hours on your calendar, or 3 hours, and call that time. I'm preparing for a negotiation. Most people don't schedule any time to prepare for a negotiation. So That's it. Preparation. If you know how to prepare, then you'll be a lot more successful. And that goes for salary negotiations as well. You gotta be prepared. You gotta be prepared. You gotta go in with clarity as opposed to vagueness.
Right. Yeah. And, that's a good point. I mean, the onboarding phase when you're, a new sales rep or what have you, BD rep, I mean, you do spend a lot of time getting to know the product, the service, the script, and how to make the call. But from a negotiation, I mean, what you're saying is a lot of people lack formal negotiation training. Am I correct in saying that?
Yes. They lack formal negotiation training. And I was just about to pull a stat out of my hat, which was that 80% of companies, and this is one of the largest negotiation studies ever done. It was a 2-year study that had 5,000 participants. It was the world's largest companies who were participating in the study. And what they found was that 80% of companies have absolutely no formal negotiation process whatsoever. 80% of companies don't. And these are the largest companies, which means they're putting their margins, they're putting their profits in the hands of salespeople and procurement who really don't know what they're doing. And I believe it's 70% of companies, of these companies who participated in the study, have no negotiation planning tools. So there's no job aids, there's no kind of sales enablement that comes in the area of negotiation. So, and then they also showed that the companies that did have a negotiation process during that 2-year period, as opposed to that companies that didn't have a negotiation process, was, I mean, I believe the companies, and I might be screwing up these stats a little bit. I can't really source it right now, but the companies that did have a negotiation process saw an increase to their net income of, I believe it was like 60%. And the companies that had no negotiation process saw a decrease in their net income of like 40%. And
wow.
And so that's a huge difference. So companies that are prepared, companies that have prepared salespeople working for them when it comes to negotiation, who are skilled and know what they're doing, companies do better. So I often say that the reason why a lot of companies are not reaching their targets or their revenue goals is not really because of their product or their innovation or the lack of sales. It's actually due to a lack of negotiating skills. That if they were able to, of course, I'm going to say this, I'm biased, but you invest in negotiation training, and it pays off.
I mean, it makes sense, right? Because you could be a great sales rep hitting all your numbers, but if you're not, I mean, you could still leave money on the table, right? I mean, there's no question. So
Sure.
I definitely see the value in formal training.
Yes.
Let's just, I mean, we quickly touched on it, but just go back to it for a second. Negotiation tactics specific to salary negotiations. I mean, Sales Talent Agency, we're a recruitment firm, and we've done all kinds of research on compensation and salary for sales positions. What is some advice you can give someone who is or will be entering a salary negotiation?
Okay. Well, I mean, the first thing is sell. Sell your value. So if you can sell your value really well, then a lot of negotiation issues will disappear. That's just like kind of an old like saying in negotiation, sales negotiation. So
Right.
the thing to understand is that in the interviewing process, you're a salesperson, right? So approach the interview process like you would approach a sales opportunity. A lot of people, what they do is they start tap dancing. They start putting on a show, and they start talking, and throwing their resume. And these are all my accomplishments, and this is how amazing I am. But that's just kind of bragging. And we already know that bragging doesn't work when it comes to sales. In fact, artificial intelligence is telling us that you don't want to spend more than 2 minutes in a conversation bragging about yourself, because it's called a 2-minute cliff. Every second after 2 minutes, your chances of closing that sale drastically decrease. So, but majority of people go into the interview process bragging. So, approach your interview as a salesperson and sell yourself as a solution. Right, sell yourself as a solution to a problem. But when it comes to the actual negotiation, you need to be prepared. So I definitely would recommend. And I don't know how I can get this information to your listeners, but I have. I'd be happy to. It could be a download link on your site or something like that. But
Absolutely.
a planning guide. So definitely have. It takes about 10-15 minutes, and it's just a planning guide that you fill in that will bring you clarity in a negotiation. You'll know what the issues. What do you want? You'll know what the company wants. You'll know what's your mission or your objective in this negotiation with this company. What's your BATNA, which is your best alternative to a negotiated agreement, which is basically what's your plan B? If this deal falls through with this company, what's my plan B? What's the organization's plan B? And then more importantly, what are some things you can trade? So what are some things that are of low cost to you and might be high value to the organization? So if they say, listen, we can't pay you $100,000 a year, we only can pay you $80,000 a year, where you can say, yes, okay, fine, I'll take $80,000 if you do this for me. So number one
Right.
tip is, trade. Don't ever give things away for free. So if the organization who you're trying to get a job with, they make you an offer and it doesn't match what you want, then that's okay. But instead of just saying yes or saying no, trade with them. Try to get something in return. So I call this the if you rule. Never make a concession without attaching those two lovely words, if and you, to the concession. So ask for things in return is definitely something you should do. But back to preparation. So having a planning guide, and your listeners will be able to download it, where they can just get some clarity and just be prepared for that. So they don't make, oftentimes we feel a lot of pressure. I just had this situation right now in this workshop I did. I talk about deadline tactics, and I talk about how buyers will put deadlines on salespeople because they know that the closer you get to that deadline, the more pressure the salesperson feels. And when salespeople are under pressure, they make bad mistakes, they make stupid mistakes, they make big concessions. So oftentimes when we're in a salary negotiation, there's a lot on the line for us, and we feel a lot of pressure. And if we don't have a plan, if we don't have something to kind of fall back on and say, this is what my plan was, we're bound to make stupid mistakes and accept bad deals for ourselves. The next thing, and this can also be a download as well. I forget the hell I call it. I forgot the name of it. It's a ledger. Basically, it's
Right.
a 10-minute exercise where you just go through all the different power sources. There's maybe about 10 power sources in a negotiation where you have leverage or your buyer has leverage. And when I say buyer, I mean oftentimes when you're trying to get a job, you're the seller. You're selling your value. You're selling your services, and the company, if they hire you, they're buying you. So there's always a seller and a buyer in a negotiation. Even if you're negotiating with your wife or your husband, there's someone who's selling and there's someone who's buying. So it's called a power ledger. So I call it a power ledger, and you take about 10-15 minutes and you just go through all the power sources and you give yourself a little check mark. Do I have the power in this category, or does the company, the hiring manager or whoever's hiring you, do they have the leverage in this negotiation? Because one of the biggest things that biggest mistakes we make as negotiators is we often, especially in the sales role, salespeople, and again, when you're approaching a negotiation, when you're trying to get a job, you're the salesperson. Oftentimes, we think that the buyer holds all the cards, the buyer has all the marbles, and we are going in and we have no leverage, and the buyer has all the leverage. But that is rarely the case. I've had over 10,000 people negotiate these case studies in my seminars and my classes. And one thing I can say for certain is that you always have more power than you think. And if you go into negotiation thinking, I don't have any power and this company has all the power, I guarantee you're not going to make a good deal for yourself. And what a power ledger does is it shows you where your leverage is, where the company's leverage is, and 9 times out of 10, you're going to walk out of that exercise after 10 or 15 minutes saying, wow, I didn't realize it, but I actually got more power than I thought I had, which will make you more confident and which will allow you to approach your negotiations with more confidence, and you'll be less likely to cave and give in and make dumb concessions.
Right. Yeah. No, that's fantastic. And that's a great segue into one of, my next question is, I've heard you mention a few times in the videos I've seen on your website that sellers typically go into a negotiation undermining the power that they hold, and they're giving power away.
Yeah.
And in addition to that, many salespeople, they hate discussing price, and, they're told all the time by people they're, talking to, your prices are too high. So they really don't, you know what I mean? They're not fully bought in themselves on the price point. So what are some ways that you've seen, what are some ways that you can overcome this mindset? So if I'm a sales rep, how can I overcome this mindset that I don't have any power?
Well, how to overcome the mindset that you have no power? Well, I just discussed this power ledger. So actually seeing it on paper, seeing the evidence of your power,
Right,
will help you out. Also, it's kind of like negotiation is risky. It's extremely risky. In fact, everything I teach is risky. If you did a 4-day workshop with me, during those whole 4 days, there's not one thing that I would teach that would work 100% of the time. So
right,
there's a great quote. One of my favorite negotiation quotes is by Sir Francis Bacon, and he says, "All negotiation involves work, discovery, and taking risks. The person willing to suffer uncertainty has a better chance to tip the balance of power in their favor than those less bold." So what this means is that most people are risk averse, and most people approach negotiations saying, I'm not going to take any risk. But if you're able to take some risk in your negotiation, and when I say taking risk, that just means utilizing tactics, just trying trading as opposed to giving in. Try taking a power ledger, doing a power ledger. Try aiming high. Try anchoring in a negotiation. Trying these things. Take some chances, and you're going to see the results. So one thing I tell people, even if you're not confident, at least pretend to be confident. And I often say, usually the first thought that comes into your mind is the wrong thought, because that's usually a risk-averse thought, or I'm scared to negotiate thought. And I teach this stuff, and I still don't trust my first thoughts. I got to be able to stand back and say, I'm going to try to get a little bit more. I'm going to take a little chance. I'm going to aim a little higher. So I want to tell people out there that you need to aim high. Aim higher than you think you can. You think you can. Try to get more than what you think you can, and don't trust those first thoughts in your head. Take a second and ask for more. Just ask for more, because I guarantee you that first thought that's going through your head is not enough. If you're about to make a concession and you're about to give some sort of discount, or lower your ask for your salary or something like that,
right.
Take a moment and stop and cut that concession in half. So that's one thing, is kind of faking it till you make it. Try, take more risk, and you'll be amazed at what starts happening if you can just start taking more risk. And secondly, and this is what AI is telling us as well, is confidence. So even if you're not confident in your pricing, even if you've fallen for the brainwashing that your competition is a lot cheaper, that your pricing is way too high. I mean, we're all told, salespeople, especially anybody in a sales position, is told 100 times a day that their pricing is too high, that their competition is cheaper, that they're told these things. So it's very easy to get brainwashed. But at least have confidence when you approach pricing conversations or salary conversations. And AI is telling us that top sales performers, they use a lot less words to explain their value or explain their pricing. So when you're trying to sell let's say your salary, you're saying I want $150,000 a year. Don't over explain that. People who are less confident, people who are needy, people who are not, they use a lot more wording, a lot more words to explain their pricing. So be brief, don't over explain it. And AI is telling us that top sales performers use 102 words on average to explain their pricing, when bottom sales performers are using over 150 words to explain their pricing. Also, AI is telling us that top sales performers take a 2.1 second pause after they say their price. So after you say your salary, take a pause. Bottom sales performers tend to keep on talking. I do this myself. I was just in a sales call with a construction company who wants to potentially hire me to train their salespeople, and I quoted my price. And as soon as I quoted my price, I said, "And don't worry, that's gross. You won't have to pay a penny more. That's all that you're going to have to pay. Everything's included. The LMS is included in that." And in my head, as I'm saying these things out of my mouth, I'm like, "Just shut up already! Why the hell am I saying these things?" I was making I teach this stuff when I make this mistake. So again. Every time you talk about price or salary, or every time you're in a negotiation, you got to pretend like you're the king of the world. You got to say things with confidence. You've got to show confidence, because people smell weakness a mile away when it comes to negotiating.
Right. And that's, it's funny you said that. That's so relevant, because I just finished doing a lot of research, and I wrote an article on cold calling. It'll be released next week. And, the person that I interviewed for it, they said the number one, he's a sales manager, and the number one component to his top performing reps was confidence. Being confident. I mean, that goes without saying, right? Yeah. But what he says, a lot of people tend to do is they don't stop talking. Instead of just stopping and having a silent break, they use filler ums and ahs, or they'll repeat information when it's funny. You don't have to, right? The top sales performers, as you just said, data is proving that they use 102 words. Like that's key information, and I can back it just based on the research that I did. So that's great to hear that.
And also, just to jump in there, I was doing a workshop with a steel company. So this is old market company, and I'm training their salespeople in challenger sale methodology. And I was actually doing a cold calling workshop. So how do you use challenger sale methodology in a cold calling situation? And so I would have people create cold calling scripts, pitches, 2-3 minutes. And I have them perform them in the workshop. And what I found was that people have a tendency to kind of inundate. They use way too much information. So it's challenger sales, all about finding a teaching point. And in a cold call, you want to find one teaching point, one thing that you can kind of get your buyer thinking, I've never thought of that before. Right. But what I find, and these are seasoned sales reps, what I find is that they start throwing all these teaching points. They start coming up with 3 or 4, and they inundate the buyer with all these teaching points, overwhelming them, and then nothing comes across as clear. And this is a kind of another age-old negotiation tactic. It's called argument dilution. So every time whenever you're making an argument, you always want to use just one argument. So let's say you make you say, I'm selling, my salary is $250,000. That's what I want. And then you need to explain your position. Why is it that you're worth $250,000? And you got to use only one argument, one explanation, one thing. And what people tend to do is that they start throwing all these things out there. So yes, some of their arguments or explanations will be wonderful, but some of them will be weak. And whenever you start throwing out more than one, what you're doing is you're diluting the strength of your strongest argument. And then you're also giving the buyer or the organization, the hiring manager, an opportunity to find gaps or holes in your weakest argument. So yeah, pick a lane, choose one thing and stick to that one thing, and don't try to don't think that there's strength in numbers when trying to persuade somebody that you need to throw all this amazing evidence and stats and data at them. Throw one thing at them, and if that doesn't work, then throw another thing at them. But don't kind of overwhelm them.
It almost turns into verbal diarrhea at that point,
Oh
right?
yeah, absolutely.
That's the term that we've thrown around before when you really don't know when and where to stop talking.
Yes,
which is really unfortunate, but a lot of us do it.
Yeah,
myself included.
Myself too.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Cool. So, Tony, I'll tell you what, we're running out of time, but I did just want to have a quick chat. You mentioned a lot of great points that I'm sure are going to be in your forthcoming book, but why don't you tell us a little bit about what readers can expect upon release for your book?
Well, it's going to be it's basically covering planning and preparation. So which I think is the most important factor in a negotiation. So how do you plan and prepare for a negotiation? What kind of questions do you need to ask? What kind of information should you be trying to gather? What are the best ways to gather information? So everything I'm covering everything that you need to know right up until the bargaining stage. So right up until the time where you're actually exchanging numbers or talking numbers or negotiating, all the ground that needs to be covered beforehand. And it's kind of like a step by step approach. And also I'm making it, and I also do it in a way where salespeople, I've worked with enough salespeople, they don't like putting a lot of time into things. I've learned that about salespeople. So how I'm kind of putting it in a way in the book where this is not going to take a lot of your time. Spend 30 minutes doing these things. And if you spend 30 minutes doing these things before a negotiation, you're going to make more commission. You're going to make more money. Just do these things. So it's basically all to do with planning and preparation.
Awesome. And just quickly, if you even have this ironed out, where would it be available for purchase?
It's probably going to be available fourth quarter of this year, and it'll be available for purchase probably on all the Amazons and the Kindles and all that stuff, all those places. Yeah.
Awesome. Well, Tony, I want to thank you very much for chatting with me today. I think we covered a lot of relevant topics, and I love your enthusiasm that you carry with you, throughout your seminars, and that I've watched a lot of videos, and even today I can hear it in your voice. It's this craft of yours. I mean, you're very knowledgeable, and I love your enthusiasm.
Oh, great! Thank you so much. That's nice of you to say.
Yeah, and I just want to know you're at the event. I want to wish you all the best with the rest of your time there, and I'm sure we'll chat again soon.
Absolutely, Stefan. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you.